Hello, spooky friends, and welcome back to a new episode of Ghouls Night In, the podcast where we talk about everything creepy with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster.
And Midge has a creepy topic for us today.
Penny's favorite thing. We're going to be talking about scary movies, specifically about the subgenre of the slasher film and how it came to be, what, makes it a slasher, and why some of us love this genre so much.
I'm excited to hear.
And I will say we're not going to deep dive into franchises on this episode. This is specifically about kind of the genre of the slasher. So do let us know if you have any specific, franchises that you're interested in us delving deeply into at some point. I would be happy to oblige. But anyway, slasher movies. I love them. It's my favorite subgenre of horror. Albeit sometimes problematic, and we will get into that today as well. But first, I guess, is kind of, what makes it a slasher. So the subgenre is basically kind of made up of a few main ingredients, being, of course, that there's a killer, usually a man.
Gotta have one of those.
Yep, usually a man in a mask of some sort, or something that obscures his identity in some way. And a big thing, of course, was that this genre, what kind of set it aside when it came out in a big way, was that it doesn't really focus on characters or character development or telling the story at all, as much as it focuses on the violence and the killing. And then, of course, we have, there's usually a final girl type character who is kind of the person at the end of it all who survives and takes down the killer, even if for only a short time.
Dun, dun, dun.
So I did some, I knew a little bit about, of course, the origin of it, because I have been deeply vested in slashers since I was younger. But I actually learned a lot of stuff researching for this podcast that I didn't know. So we're going to talk about some early influences of the genre. And before the slasher film, there, of course, what was, quote, scary before that, we had the classic monster films, the Universal Creature from the Black Lagoon, that kind of stuff. And a lot of supernatural horror, which is where we get a lot of our great, ridiculous B films, alien foreheads from outer space type stuff in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Mm-hmm. So in the 60s, though, this was something I did not know. The first kind of quote slashers, even though they aren't exactly what we know today, were actually Italian films. Huh. And they were called giallo, which is the Italian word for yellow, called yellow films, or spaghetti thrillers. And they were called yellow films because of crime novels from Italy that were yellow covered kind of pulp novels.
Like a pulp novel.
And those kind of started paving the way for what would become the slasher film later. They were a lot more kind of crime thrillers. In Germany started these as well. They were called Krimi films. But it kind of ended up leading the way to what some people, I don't call this the first American slasher, but for
already getting controversial,
kind of paved the way for Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It was very much that style. The Italian films were kind of in that, which, Psycho is interesting because now it's not that scary, but for the time it pushed a lot of boundaries of what you could and couldn't show. But that kind of Psycho kind of ushered in the era of the psychopath, the new fear was humans, less than monsters and supernatural things. It was more what are people capable of when they're pushed to their limit. So then we kind of get into, this is what actually I kind of consider to be what started the genre. And I actually got to watch this film for the first time 2 weeks ago for another podcast that I was a guest on, Nightmare on Fear Street. They do horror movie kind of dissections. But it's a Canadian film called Black Christmas. It was released in 1974, and it very much plays on the kind of urban legend of like, you know, killer living in the attic of a sorority house type thing. But it was really interesting because I had not seen it before, and it was released, like I said, in 74. John Carpenter's Halloween did not come out till 1978. And watching Black Christmas, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is Halloween. Yeah. I mean, it's not. It's definitely not as good, and the plot definitely leaves something to be desired. The characters are not very interesting, but the premise that you never see the killer, and it's kind of this shape that is Black Christmas's kind of fear point, and that is exactly what John Carpenter did 4 years later. Of course, he expanded it a lot. But John Carpenter's Halloween was like either the or one of the highest grossing independent films of all time. Oh, wow. And that is where we really start getting into the like pattern, the what's the word I want? Like the template for what the modern slasher became in the United States. So that's a little bit of our history of how did we get here. And then, of course, from the 70s, I guess I should give credit where it's due too. Texas Chainsaw Massacre also came out in 1974. Oh, yeah. And I think that's kind of one of the lesser appreciated slashers. For me, it's hard to watch because it is based on Ed Gein and like some of his crimes, and it's pretty horrific. It's
a good old Wisconsin boy.
Yes. There's a lot of serial killers from Wisconsin.
Yep.
A whole lot of them. Penny, is there something you'd like to tell us?
No comment.
But the 70s really started kind of putting forth this idea of this merciless killer that kind of kills without reason, almost. And that, you know, we get into the 80s, we get Friday the 13th franchise, Wes Craven hits the scene, Nightmare on Elm Street comes out, which that ended up also being a huge, like, whole other thing, because these other, you know, killers in previous slasher films, they're kind of localized. Like, Michael Myers is localized to Haddonfield because he's tracking Laurie. Like, he has a specific goal. And like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he's kind of stuck in this small town where he's from. But Freddy brought this whole other level of villainry because he can literally get you anywhere in your dreams. And that film franchise, which as you know for sure, Penny, and I think most of our audience knows, is my favorite slasher franchise, the Nightmare on Elm Street films. But they got to get really, I hate to say it that way, it sounds so bad, but we're going to get into that too. They were able to get really creative with the kills because they weren't bound by reality with him as a killer. So it was, you know, kind of about how far Freddy could take things outside of, you know, Michael obviously can stab somebody in real time, in real life, but Freddy has all these capabilities outside of that, almost like a supervillain. Yeah. And he's also the first kind of slasher villain that we get to know him. Yeah. Which I think you and I both said Freddy is our favorite, like, slasher villain. And he kind of paves the way for like Child's Play with Chucky, like these kind of funny, campy villains in slashers that we get through the 90s. And I don't know, Wes Craven really becomes the master of horror during this time. Of course, you know, 10 years later we get Scream. Yeah. And that is its whole other thing, with it kind of poking fun at its own genre and combining the slasher with the whodunit film. And, you know, we're still, I think Scream paved a whole new way too for the slasher genre. Like I think I would still say we're in the Scream era of slashers. Like Fear Street came out this past year, the Fear Street trilogy on Netflix, and those are very much patterned in a Scream type template where it's a lot of jokes at the expense of the genre, but is still lots of great jump scares, lots of fun, interesting ways that they go about that. So we're up to the modern slasher.
Hey.
Penny has let me rant incessantly for 10 minutes here. Before I get into kind of some of the problematic aspects of slasher films. So you are not a big scary movie person, but do you enjoy a slasher at all?
Yeah, I would say that I occasionally dabble in a slasher. I don't watch a lot of scary movies, but like I definitely find like slasher movies are a fun movie to watch with people. Because it's definitely, especially in kind of like our modern Scream era, like it's enough of like a tongue-in-cheek kind of experience that you kind of get into it in a group. So like I've seen Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, some things like that. So I think it is, I do enjoy this. Feels weird to say, but I do enjoy a creative slasher.
Well, and that's kind of my next point too, is like this weird cultural bonding experience we all have with slashers over like watching people get killed. It's not great. But there is something it's the closest I've ever gotten to understanding why people like true crime, because I was never a true crime person. But there is something like therapeutic about it almost. Like it hits this weird primal fear of like getting killed, but then you can like laugh at it because it's goofy.
Yeah, and I am very much a true crime person. So
yes, you are.
So I definitely feel that vibe, and like I think it says a lot that like a lot of true crime podcasts and things like that do build up like a big community around them, because it is like there's something to be said for kind of that communal experience of kind of experiencing and confronting a fear or anxiety. And I think you feel like a little bit better about it. Like you almost feel like maybe you're like mentally prepared a little bit more. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that, and that's something that, this is just a side thing, I'm sure this happens with slashers too. But kind of the concept of, does exposure to this make you more nervous about the topic or less nervous about it? Because a lot of people get extra anxious, but I kind of feel like, okay, like now my brain has run through these scenarios and I'm less like threatened by them.
Yeah. And that's, I definitely too kind of in my my notes have the, sense of like, does this desensitize us? Does it make us more violent? Does it make us, but I also, I agree with you. Like I think slashers always have me like checking my exits, anytime I go, anytime I go anywhere new, I'm like, okay, how do I get out of here if I have to? I don't know. I think there is, and like I said, with the Scream era, I think we've really melded into kind of this weird like whodunit sort of slasher. Like, whereas in the 70s and 80s, it was very much like, this is the killer, and we know, even though he's masked, we know who he is. Like, we know who Mike Myers is. We know who Jason Voorhees is. Whereas like a lot of modern, like I like the aspect of like, oh, who is it behind the mask? Like, who is the killer? Actually, this is a little off topic, but I just finished the show Only Murders in the Building. Have you watched that yet?
Oh, I haven't. It is on my list.
Oh, I highly recommend it. If any of y'all listening have watched that show, please DM me personally, not the Ghouls Night In, because Penny hasn't watched it. But
no, don't spoil it for me.
Don't spoil it, but DM Miss Midge, and let's talk about Only Murders, because oh my god, so fun. But anyway, yeah, I think it's actually, so I recently read a book for my book club called Final Girls Support Group by Grady
Mm-hmm.
Hendrix. And it is really interesting because it does, now I will say, I have my own opinions about that book, and I think that Grady's writing is problematic in a lot of ways. But that do be the horror genre, unfortunately.
Yes.
But it did deconstruct horror in a really interesting way, because the premise of the book is that it's all the final girls, like after the movies have taken place, like what's left of their lives. And
Mm-hmm.
but it's in a reality like that he's constructed, where the films were actually made about like real people.
Mm-hmm.
And so these women are seeing people wearing like Jason masks, you know, for Halloween, and like wearing Freddy merch, and like
Yeah.
this weird sensationalization of killers. And it is really like, if I sit and think about it too long, it is very weird. Like these franchises have big fans.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the top grossing slasher films of all time, in box office, like, and I definitely would not say this as like a well liked film by any means. I love it personally, but is Freddy versus Jason.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that was a movie for the fans, like specifically that they merged those two franchises, and it is literally nothing but like entertainment for the people who are fans of these killers. And that's
Yeah.
really like really wild when you sit and think about it. But I definitely do want to get into kind of also the problematic aspects of slasher films, because I feel like you can't talk about this genre without getting into the moral aspects of it.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, top trope that I feel like comes to mind when people say slasher is that for years it was like the black character dies first,
Mm-hmm.
which is of course problematic on so many levels. And I feel like a lot of modern slashers are doing a better job of deconstructing that.
Mm-hmm.
But even, I mean, I've noticed even in the wake of like the last couple of years, like the Fear Street trilogy, in the second film, the first kill is the one of the only black characters in the show.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because films like that are working to deconstruct the tropes of that, but then they still seem to fall into them every
Yeah.
time. And then there's of course also, you know, the moral kind of dilemma with usually characters who are killed in, especially in the 70s and 80s slashers, were like, if you have sex you
Oh
die
yeah.
kind of thing. And it kind of becomes this well, that character deserved to die because they were morally questionable.
Yeah.
Which, you know, then we build a whole thing around slut shaming, and it's really complicated to like slasher films. I think there are so many, and then of course, yeah, just the rooting for blood, kind of like the most creative kill kind of thing. I'm excited for where the genre is going, because I am seeing a lot of really interesting turns. I know a lot of y'all, if you follow me on Instagram, like I got to see Candyman this year.
Mm-hmm.
The new Candyman, the 1992 Candyman, has its own issues as well. But like Candyman was amazing, and they really took the opportunity to merge a slasher film, really like still using the template of a good slasher, but also making a really strong statement. And I really, really, Nia DaCosta, round of applause.
Yes.
Incredible direction, incredible screenwriting, like just freaking good filmmaking. I'm excited to hopefully see more of that coming out of the slasher genre in the next like 10 years. And I hope people will get on board with it, because I know like we're still remaking Scream, which I'm not. Am I going to go? Absolutely. Am I going to go see Scream 5 on like opening night? Yeah. Like, was I like here with bells on for Halloween Kills? Absolutely. But I hope that we can kind of appreciate where the genre came from, but see it continue to evolve into something better.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also just, even obviously it is better to be less problematic and less shitty about things, but even if you set any of that aside, like it's such fertile ground to like subvert these tropes, and it's much more
Exactly.
creatively interesting to do something new with a genre. And I think it's a TV tropes term, like lampshading a trope, where
Mm-hmm.
you like acknowledge it but then kind of set it on its head. And that's
Yes.
always been like my favorite kind of thing in any genre that I like, is to kind of see those twists on the classics. And I think that we've definitely seen some movies thus far that are definitely doing that, and I hope that we do continue to see more.
I also love that. I mean, maybe a weird hill for me to die on here, but I love that we're seeing more female killers and things too. Like I like. I mean, okay. Spoiler alert. Skip ahead
Oh,
10 seconds right now if you haven't seen Scream 4. First of all, what are you doing? But anyway, uh Scream 4, they do the whodunit thing again. You don't know who Ghostface is,
mhm.
and then it ends up being a woman at the end, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, like, and it's so interesting that like you get through it and you're not suspecting it to be a woman. Like
Yeah.
even that, it's so simple to just flip that trope. Uh but like our brains are so trained to this, specific template, which of course, there are also reasons for that are rooted in reality, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, I'm excited for this kind of new generation of voices to take over. I mean, not just slasher, the horror genre, and
Mhm.
reboot it in a way that I think is going to be both exciting, creative, and interesting, but also hopefully like more aware and making really creative art that is not only entertaining and spooky, but also says something along the way. Because I think, um, at the end of the day, like why the slasher is popular is because a lot of our reality is rooted in violence, like our world, and like you said, it gives us an outlet to face our fears in a safe way.
Mhm.
And I think the genre can do a lot with that, with everything going on in our world. um but I will always love a classic slasher. I'm still going to watch Nightmare on Elm Street all the time. Well, thank you for letting me word vomit about this, because I know it's not your shtick, but I really I had to cover slashers at some point because they are just one of my absolute favorite things to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the history of it's super interesting to kind of see. And we were just talking about wanting to see it evolve, and you can see from the history that it has evolved a lot to get to this point. So
Yes.
there's no reason that it shouldn't keep kind of evolving and changing with sort of the new fears and better ways to represent people and things
Yes.
and stuff. I always feel kind of guilty for it, but I when you said that you were excited when a slasher turned out to be a woman, like
Mm-hmm.
I always like kind of secretly love when like a horror movie of any kind of ends with the scared girl taking back control and
Yeah, the final
getting
girl.
added, like just saying like, no, I'm not the final girl, I'm gonna kick your ass. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
very like I have a very Lucille Bluth good for her reaction.
Oh, good for her. Horror is my new favorite genre. Uh,
Yes.
I I honestly, I mean, I think that's why Midsummer was so popular.
I just watched Midsummer on Friday, and I
Oh,
was
did
like,
you?
yeah,
Oh,
and
tell me everything.
and I was gonna be like, I'm like, this isn't a slasher movie, but
No.
like, good for her.
Well, and what's I mean really fascinating about that movie is Ari Aster doesn't classify it as like a horror film. He
Yeah,
says
yeah.
it's a breakup movie.
Yeah, it was interesting. I liked it a lot, and I was like, this doesn't really say horror to me. It is just kind of like a thriller. I mean, it has a lot to say about grief, I think, and
Yes.
like emotional experiences and the ways that we do and do not connect with other people.
Hmm.
So Total, not real, just a sidebar of
No, I'm
commentary
glad.
about.
No, it's great. That's a great like other kind of subgenre that was also why I loved Babadook. It
Mhm.
really commentated on grief and trauma. Like I think there's so many smart ways to use horror to dissect like very real things that we are all experiencing, and people are really starting to go there, and I think it's the genre is just going to keep getting smarter and more interesting, and I can't wait to see what's coming next. I really can't.
Yeah, one of the first horror movies that I saw that I did like really like and was like, oh, I could be into this, was Your Next. So
Oh yes.
that
Yep.
same kind of good for her
Yeah,
vibe.
that and Jennifer's Body, which you know is
Yeah.
one of my favorites.
Hmm.
Very, very good for her. Um, Also, weirdly, kind of a slasher in its own right. If you have not seen Jennifer's Body, turn this podcast off right now and go watch it, or
I'll
I
check it
cannot continue to speak into your ear holes if you have not seen Jennifer's Body. Or oh my gosh, what's the Ready or Not? With the right? That's not what it's called. With the
I do
bride.
not know.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know. My brain's fried at this point, but yeah, that is an exciting, fun genre that's emerging slowly but surely as well. And actually, I think speaking of, I'm gonna do another shameless plug here. If you guys do not already, if you're not aware of Nightmare on Fear Street podcast, I would highly recommend it. It's led by Sheree Bohannon and Trent Reese, and they spend a lot of time dissecting horror from an intersectional standpoint, both for people of color and for queer folks, and all kinds of great conversation being had on that podcast. And Sheree recently made a list for one of the big horror news outlets. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like, I think the list was literally called Ghouls Night In. That's what I thought of this. And it was all like kind of horror driven by women, but not in like a final girl way.
Yeah.
And it's a really, really well put together list of 10 films. And I will try to remember to link it in like my Instagram stories, or somewhere, like list it on the Instagram for Ghouls Night In, so you guys can check it out, because it's very, very good.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that and put some of those on my personal list.
Yay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Do head over to our socials at Ghouls Night In Pod, and let us know what your favorite horror slasher franchise is. Who's your favorite slasher villain? What's a kind of wave happening in the current horror, like, what am I?
The zeitgeist.
What is a kind of new wave of horror that you're excited to see happening? Just give me your thoughts, opinions, ideas. I love to hear what you guys are interested in as well. So.
Yeah, we got to know.
Yeah, we got to. And of course, don't forget to, leave us a review wherever you digest your podcasts. We love to hear your thoughts and opinions about what we're doing here, and we appreciate y'all listening so much. If you're looking for me, you can find me across all platforms at Midge Munster.
And you can find me at Penny Snark.
And thank you all again so much for listening today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time, goodbye.